this is Neiman Kingsley, the old sage on the mountain. You may ask me three questions.
Are you really Neiman Kingsley?
Yes,
Really?
yes,
You?
yes. Thank you, come again.
Hey guys, this is Martin from DrGiggy
And Neiman Cancray.
for our new series, which is exactly like the old series, but kind of the opposite, and it's gonna be me playing and us two reviewing the session. Basically, first I'm gonna have to ask you guys to ignore the chat box because I was typing a lot of weird stuff in the chat box because at the beginning we were supposed to like exchange sessions and then Neiman was supposed to review mine alone, but then we decided to do both, like both at the same time. So I was just typing random stuff in the chat box for Neiman to read and then just screw him up with my session review. So you'll just have to ignore that. And then that's pretty much it. I don't really remember a session. I played it a while ago, like a couple of months, like maybe 3 months ago. So I don't remember it that much. I just remember it was really, really wild. I went flips on my left on two of my tables. For maybe those who know him on 2+2 as T Corbin, he's like a pretty maniac guy. And I've got Ibashi Mai on a couple of tables too, who both guys knew I was making a video, so they were trying to make it pretty interesting and aggressive. I figured out after a while that Ibashimai was completely tilted when the session started, but I didn't figure it out until like 15 minutes into the session, so it makes for some pretty interesting stuff. The other guys, I don't really have that much of a read, like no prestige read. I know that back access on table 3 is a regular, and that's pretty much it from what I see. Publius is a regular as well. So we'll see how it develops. And I do remember that I had a lot of interesting spots, and a couple of tables are 200 big blinds deep too. So we will be able to cover that, which we didn't do in the first series.
Cool. I have to say, I don't know what. No, I'm ready to go. I'm just, I'm excited. I don't know what I'm more excited about, which is working with you again and analyzing with you again, which has been awesome, or being able to see a new intro from you. I've been waiting for that ever since that last one.
It's not done yet, but I hope my intro was funny, guys.
Yeah, I guess by the time people are hearing us talk about it, they will have already seen it. But
Yep.
I haven't seen it yet. But
I'll work on that.
all right, so off we go.
Yep. So yeah, like I said, that's pretty much my reads for the guys. I think two tables on the left are deep, tables on the right are non-deep, and yep.
Okay, so just jumping right in. 8-6 suited in the small blind against a button raise, especially at a deep table. You like folding that?
I think it depends. I probably folded it just because I was like starting my session and like screwing around with Camtasia and then just decided to fold it. I'm not calling it every single time, to be honest, or re-raising it. I'm going to be doing my 3 options a lot depending on who I'm playing against. If it's a weaker player, either weak, regular, or just a fish, I'm just never ever folding that, either re-raising or calling it. If it's a very good regular, I'm not necessarily playing it. It might be like a bit of a leak, but I don't think I'm like passing on that much money by folding it. It's close actually, especially with a guy like I win flips in the big line here, who is gonna squeeze like the shit out of us like every single time I flatten the small blind. So I think in that exact situation, I think it might be better to either re-raise it because we're 200 big blinds deep. That's kind of hand you do want to re-raise 200 big blinds deep, or fold it. I don't think calling is that good of an option because of the big blind.
Yeah, that's interesting to me because it's definitely a hand that I don't think I would ever fold in a situation
I think you do have to be really, really comfortable playing out of position to be able to play these hands profitably. I'm never gonna fold it out of the big blind, but out of the small blind, I think it's a bit closer, and I think a lot of players are gonna call that where they shouldn't, or where they should work their game to be able to call that, because they're spewing money a lot by calling these type of hands, I think.
Yeah, you know, one interesting stylistic difference between us two. Actually, before I talk about that, I just want to actually make another comment too. Um, I think most of you guys that are watching this video will have watched the previous series, and you might want to refer back to the very end of the last um, video in that series, part 7 of my session, in which we discussed in detail about why a hand like ace-6 suited becomes a better hand to 3-bet when you're 200 big blinds deep, and why the value of that hand increases a lot more than the value, you know,
Yeah.
in the same way that a hand like ace king or something like that decreases in value. We talked about that. Basically, what it comes down to is the stack depth at which you can play a one pair hand for for stacks. But you know, I don't want to get into detail because we talked about it at length in the last video, which incidentally was only about 15 minutes ago for us. But but just something that you might want to refer to so that you kind of understand where we're going with this discussion. That being said, what I was going to say about our stylistic differences, and I think it's interesting because I think one of the things in the comments that we get in the forum thread about this video series, as well as in the comments, is how people like to see the differences in our styles. You know, we're both very big winning players, but there's certain situations where both of us would have handled it completely differently because it falls in keeping with the body of work that is our own style. Yep. And I think one general thing that I've learned is that you're a player who applies tremendous pressure to your opponents, and you really keep the heat on them, and you force them into mistakes. And with me, not that I'm not aggressive, you know, I'll splish and splash a lot and apply pressure myself, but I also tend to be a lot more reactive and put myself in a position to make decisions and then just try to make them well, and let my opponents try to apply the pressure incorrectly, so to speak, to me.
Yeah, I pretty much do exactly the contrary. Yeah, I see where you're going.
And so I think
that's true.
Yeah, and I think both styles are good if you can play them well. You obviously play yours very well, and I'd like to think I play mine pretty well. And I think that may be why it's easier and more comfortable for me to call with a hand like 8-6 suited from the small blind than it is for you.
I don't think I'm as good as you to be able to play first out of position. Might be a bit of a leak in my game, and when I don't have the initiative, I do have problems playing when I don't have the initiative, when I have to react to what my opponent's gonna do, and that's a spot. If I call the 6-8 suited, I'm just gonna have to react to what my opponent's gonna do, like haul and long, and I'm not that comfortable doing that than like re-raising it and then putting pressure on my opponent. I'm way more comfortable doing that. I'm working on it, but it's pretty tough. It might be the toughest thing in poker, basically, technically speaking.
Yeah, and that's really cool. I'm glad we identified that because it's it's always great to be able to learn from each other too. I learn a lot from your style and the way, and I've actually taken a lot of what you've taught me to heart in terms of when and where to step on the gas and stuff on my opponents. But that is something that I think is one of my strongest traits, is being able to just sit and play defense, basically. Well. And so therefore, I mean, that's why I was kind of shocked when I saw you fold this, because I would never ever fold that hand in this situation against a button.
Okay, I don't think I can play it profitably against a very good regular with another very good regular in the big blind. I just don't think I can, so I just folded, which I don't think is a big mistake by any means. I think some people just spend too much time like thinking, should I play that or should I not play that, when in the end it's not like EV wise or whatever long term wise, it's not that relevant. It's what you're gonna do with it post flop, which is relevant, and people don't spend as much time thinking about how to play it post flop than on like whether they should play it or not pre-flop, and that's a pretty big mistake by a lot of players, I think, just generally speaking.
Yeah. I mean, two things to take away from this, and apologize for this long drawn out discussion before we've even played a hand, but it's at least a little bit important. Two things is, one is what Martin said. I just want to restate that and add my support to what he said. I think people spend too much time worrying about what hands they should have played, or what hands they should have entered a pot with, especially in single raised pots. That's not. If the decision is close, then usually the EV decision of it is going to be pretty close. So if you're not making a big mistake,
it's pretty neutral most of the time.
Right. And really, the big mistakes or the big successes you're going to make is in terms of how you handle them post flop.
Yep.
But similarly, I think it's really it's important for you guys to understand your own strengths and weaknesses and be able to honestly assess yourself. And I think this is something, where this is a particular, obviously both Martin and I are very successful players in our own rights, but this is a spot where I believe I would be passing up plus EV, so I would never fold this. But Martin, despite the fact that he's obviously an outstanding, huge winning player, recognizes that this is not one of his strengths necessarily to be able to play that kind of spot in that kind of position against good players. And so, honestly assessing himself, he doesn't have like a hero complex saying, I'm DrGiggy, I'm invincible, you know what I mean?
I do have that, but not that time.
No, I mean, but you do in the areas where you're good.
Yep.
And I mean, not that you're bad at this or anything, but it's just, all I'm trying to say is that it's important for you guys to be able to honestly assess yourself and then play to your strengths while you work on your weaknesses.
Yeah, and while you are working on them.
So, okay, so with that intro, let's actually get to some hands.
And with that written, this should be a 58 part. It's gonna be fun, guys. We're here for a while. I think I almost played that King 3 offsuit on table 3 more often than I'm gonna play 6 suited with position 200 big blinds deep. I'm gonna just 3-bet like anything on my button, like almost always. So just to give you an assessment of my playing style.
Yeah, 200 big blinds is a nice one to be able to 3-bet more, because I don't like people automatically 3-bet their buttons a lot. But I don't think it's that good 100 big blinds deep, because when you do it,
it's a lot less good than it used to be, just because people learned how to 4-bet bluff and how to call with some kind of range out of position and how to maneuver it. Back in like maybe even a year ago, it was a lot better because people were just defending my calling out of position than playing like retards while doing it. So it was really, really good, even 100 big blinds deep. But now people learn to 4-bet bluff and 4-bet for value and have good ranges of that. So it's not nearly as good as it used to be. Like calling in position at 100 big blinds deep became a lot more good if you want to put pressure on your opponents.
Yeah, but, that's exactly right. The key there is that at 200 big blinds, at 100 big blinds deep, a 3-bet pot doesn't have enough room to apply maximum pressure to your opponent.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't make 3 full post-flop bets.
Yep.
Whereas you can.
And you cannot. Another important thing is if you 3-bet and you get 4-bet, the end is pretty much done. You either have to ship it or fold it, and it becomes like a variance festival instead of skills. So
and not only that, not only a variant festival, but you've just effectively given up your advantage of having position.
Yep.
Because if they end the hand pre-flop,
while at 200 big blinds deep and more, you can call 4-bets in position, and then there's still some skill involved, even when you get 4-bet, and like it's gonna be the deeper you are, the tougher it's gonna be for your opponent to react to your 3-bets.
Exactly.
So yeah, that's one of the adjustments that I'm gonna be making when I'm deep, and I'm doing it more and more. I think at the beginning I didn't quite make that much of a difference, but right now I kind of learned that from Big Ship, who I know when he's deep, he's just 3-betting like non-stop, like every single end, 3-betting small every single end position, so he gives himself some odds to call a 4-bet if the guy does 4-bet, or even like 5-bet bluff sometimes, and do stuff like that. So I've learned that from him to be able to assess myself a good range to do that, and it becomes so tough for your opponent to play because you force him to play big pots when he's out of position. That's basically what you're gonna do. You're gonna be playing all the big pots when you're in position, or to just fold to like he opens and then he has to fold to a re-raise. So it's not good for him either. So it's really powerful.
This is 200 big blinds deep, right?
Yeah,
you're talking about yeah. Question about table 4.
Yep.
Not a question. Actually, I just want to lend support to the play. Martin called the raise with pocket sevens, and then there's a call from the small blind, and then the flop checks through. It might be obvious for some people, but I think that a lot of times people get into the habit of auto betting when it checks to them in their last to act.
I almost have that habit, to be honest. Let's say I'm either tilted or not concentrated. I am auto betting when it checks to me. But I think that exact situation is like the worst situation. That's like the worst board ever to do that, and the worst hand ever because you basically have only 2 outs.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say, is that it's not typically most of the time, especially when the pre-flop raiser slows down and comes to you, it is usually good to bet. But this is, but you can't automatically do it. You can't be on auto mode. You have to pay attention. And this board is one that is, in fact, a very, very bad hand to do it. Just because, if you think about it, even though the pre-flop raiser checked when he had a chance to bet, there's almost never are you getting through both opponents with a bet here, because the board is so, like, there's all kinds of draws and gut shots and middle pairs. And, the small blind could still have top pair on the flop. And it's all in the playing range, and it's all connected. And so the chances of you taking it down against 2 callers, against 2 others, are very low. And then you've got nothing to add equity to your hand. It's,
Yep.
even one of your set cards, if you turn a set, makes a flush and a straight. Yeah. So this is actually one of the instances which is, you typically should show the aggression to bet when people show weakness to you, especially when the pot is, 3-handed, certainly heads up. But this is definitely a situation where Martin correctly checked, and you need to recognize those instead of just being on auto. Okay, check, my turn, I bet mode. That's all.
Another thing, did you have anything to add?
No, that's all I was going to say, because I don't want you guys to take that too far and, just not bet without having something good in these spots. Most of the time you should, if you're last to act and it checks to you, you should bet and see if you can take it down. But look to see how many hands there can be that people can continue with, especially situations where people can have hands that could have continued with, but that they wouldn't necessarily have bet the flop in the first place.
And another thing that I want to have that you have to think about when you are deciding whether to bet or not, that kind of situation, is whether the turn is going to be a good 2-barrel spot or not. Like with every card falling, will you be able to take down the pot on the turn? Because a lot of times when I am thinking about betting, I'm like, okay, I know I'm just not going to take down the pot on the flop, like very, very rarely. But the way the board is set out and the way like who is going to call in, etc., I am going to take down the pot on the turn or the river so often that I don't even really care about what I have and if people are going to play the flop, because I'm just betting the flop to 2 or 3 barrel basically. But that's not really one of these cases, because when I bet and I get called, I can't fire a wet card, let's say a card that brings out straights or flush, because it might have hit my opponent. But I can't really fire a dry card as well, like a brick, like a 2 of hearts or anything like that, because my opponents could put me on the draw myself because there are too many draws, so they could decide to check shove with their stack size on the turn with something like ace-10 or whatever that they decided to check out the flop with. So no matter what, the turn is not going to be a good second barrel spot most of the time, and you really want to be looking for that and assess whether it's going to be or not. So I decided that this was not going to be one, so I just shut it up right away and just give up. right on the flop.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. You wanna, the key here is that neither a wet card nor a dry card is gonna leave you in a position where you can happily bet because you don't know which we are trying to dodge or hit.
And that's something I'm gonna talk about a lot. I think if I have the occasion to anticipate basically every single situation possible. What's the most probable thing to happen on subsequent streets, on turn and river and stuff like that, and then base your play on the flop or pre-flop or on the turn based on what is the most likely thing to happen on the later streets, and that's something that really, really important if you do want to not get caught in like having to take weird decisions that you don't know how to handle them like later in the end.
Yep, I totally agree, and I just want to add a macroscopic point. This goes in keeping with playing poker in a flow, so to speak, and not dealing with just like you wouldn't deal with a hand in isolation. You want to look at the parametrics of what's been happening that whole session, as well as in your whole history against that opponent and so on. Just like that, you don't want to deal with the decisions in a hand in isolation either. Just like you would never make a decision on the river without knowing what happened on the turn or the flop, you also want to look forward too. You don't want to make a decision on the flop that's independent of what may happen on the turn or river. You want to consider the entire hand as one when you make your decision. Just the same reason, like obviously, if you 3-bet a pot, you would handle the flop differently than if you called a single raise.
Yep.
Similarly, it's basically you're putting together the whole hand, and I think people do that pretty well when they look backwards. They look what had happened in the hand to this point, so that means that they should do this. But people don't do that as well when they look forwards in a hand.
Yep.
And this is a real good example of Martin talking about looking forward, and really there's no positive prospects looking forward in this hand, so therefore it's better to just check.
And there's another good example right now on table 1. I hope I did not bet that flop, because that's a good example of, okay, if I bet the flop, let's say, okay, you flop top pair aces, it's probably good, so let's say technically it might be good to bet it for protection because there are diamonds and whatever out there. But let's say I do bet the flop, what's the most likely thing to happen? I get called maybe by, if I get raised, I'm done. If I get called by, let's say, one player, then I'm not comfortable like doing anything on any turn basically. If the guy in position calls and then a diamond comes, I'm done again. So I'm just, that's a part of the range where I don't have that much equity, and that's a point of like betting your equity. And even if a bricks comes on the turn, I do not know if I have to bet again, because if I do bet, he might just like start calling with ace jack and ace queen and up, and then fold what I'm beating. And even if he calls with like middle pair with diamonds, still have a lot of good equity. And if I check, I don't want to give him a free card as well. So like if I bet the flop, all of my options are gonna suck for the rest of the end basically. If I do check though, and it goes, I don't know, check, 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 then a break comes, my hand is underrepresented, so all my options, not all my options, but my option of betting and then betting again now becomes a super good option because I'm underrepresented. And that's a really good example, I think, of being able to correctly like anticipate what you should do, what you should not do by what's gonna happen most likely on later street.
Yeah, when you were just saying what you were saying, you said a phrase, I'd never heard it before, and it's awesome. It sounded so good, and it's so important, and it encapsulates a lot of what we try to teach to you guys.
I hope you remember it, because I just forgot what I said.
Yeah, no, it was a great phrase. I'd never heard it said that way before, but it was awesome, and I hope you guys can get as much out of that phrase as I think you might be able to when you think about betting. Martin said you bet your equity. That's a really good way of putting it. At any given time in poker, you're not betting your hand as much as you are betting your equity. You're always betting your equity. And what that could mean, the current value, obviously your equity is the value of your hand on the river, for example. But it also involves like when you're betting it, you're thinking about your equity, not whether your hand is good or not, but whether your hand is good against your opponent's river calling range. That's your equity. It gets more complicated earlier in the hand when you're betting a flop like King 10-8 with 2 spades. You're thinking about your equity in terms of if you're called, do you have positive equity on a variety of turns? Can turns help you bet, help you, barrel, et cetera, et cetera. Same thing with here. And in this situation, tables 1 and 4 are both situations where a bet would be negative equity. And this is somewhat independent of the value of his hand. Even though he has a decent hand in table 1, his equity of a bet is negative. So just remember that one, because that one struck me pretty hard as a really cool way of saying it. When you're betting, remember that you're betting your equity.
I did steal it from someone. I don't know who though, so I'm sorry I did not invent that. But yeah, that's something that you always have to keep in mind too. Not bet your hand, but bet your equity. Yes, that is true.
Cool. And I agree with everything you said about not betting on table 1.
So now let's see if I checked or if I bet. I might go ahead and bet sometimes. Okay, I checked. Phew. I'm relieved. I thought about betting my 7s on the turn on the other table, but I decided it was probably not a good option because I think
you're going to get called by a 10. Yeah, you're going to get called by a 10 and you have some showdown value.
No, I'm just trying to be fancy and get some value out of my 7s from like ace high or something like that.
Wow, hold on a second. I want to pause this because I don't think I like that bet. Although I think I might be proved wrong here, or we'll be proved here in a second.
Yeah,
I don't think I think that sometimes, not very often, because it probably would bet by the river, but sometimes a 10, you might be against a 10 there. They'll call 100% of the time. But don't you think that when you bet there against 2 people, you are going to be, the calling range against you is going to be, have you beat? I would bet probably if I had 9s. But I think the fact that there's an 8 on board and you're underneath that, I think that just swings it towards it being a negative EV bet, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's pretty close, actually. I probably made it just to be funny because it was a video. But I think it's still pretty good because both players seem to be fish. They don't have a full stack, and they seem to be pretty bad. So I expect the original raiser to be most likely to have ace high here than like a pair, because he's more likely than a regular to like bet a pair of 10s on the flop because he just wants to protect his pair of 10s or whatever. He just wants to bet it because he has a pair. That's, if I'm against a regular, I'm gonna assess him a range of like 10s, a pair of 10s, jacks, queen, pair of 8s more often than like ace high, which he would bet the flop more often with like ace, queen, ace, jack as a continuation bet with some backdoor value or whatever. So here I think him being a fish is going to have ace high more often than a regular, so I think my bet is a bit better against him. And I think with this sizing, ridiculous sizing, I think he's going to call pretty much always if he has ace high, so we'll see if I'm right. And there's also, I don't know if you agree with what I just said.
Yeah. No, I understand. I also didn't notice that you made a really... a tiny bet size.
It was absurdly small, so I don't know. I wouldn't really not like a big bet here.
Okay. Yeah, that actually makes it a lot more palatable to me. I didn't realize you made a tiny little bet.
Okay. And there was on table 1, 2, I did call a bet when the guy bet on 4 diamonds. Like he bet super small on the turn, like 8, with my pair of aces, no diamonds there. I think I made that call basically because I am very confident that first I'm not gonna get bluffed out of my hand if he has nothing, because he looks like a pretty bad player. I think his bet is so small that some of the time it's going to be just, I don't think he's betting like 2 pairs or stuff like that, like ever, and it's going to be with air a lot.
Well, that's the key, I think, is when you have a 4 flush board and someone bets, especially, in a situation like that, especially after the flop checks through, the bet is usually going to be so polarized.
Yeah, exactly. That's what
I think that... that you can call with a hand like this. I mean, I think that, like, for example, if I'm in this situation, I would bet twice probably, especially if I'm playing against a good thinking player like you. I might bet twice with the 10 of diamonds for sure. In my hand. But I don't think most people do here. Usually a bet is going to be air, which you beat, or the king of diamonds.
Or some weird diamonds sometimes, but then it's super easy to play afterwards. You're not gonna make big mistakes if you call that turn bet. Like, it's another thing of anticipating. Even though I'm not good now, I'm not gonna pay off another big bet, and I'm not gonna get bluffed out because I know this guy is just a retard most of the time. So he's not gonna like pot the river with nothing, knowing that I cannot have the king of diamonds, etc., etc. If he has nothing, it was probably just small attempt to take down the pot, and then I know he's gonna shut down most of the time. So by anticipating the fact that he's gonna shut down if he has nothing, and I can comfortably fold my hand if he does have a diamond and bets it out, then I think it becomes a good call. Whereas if I was against a regular and I wouldn't know if he would, like, his bluffing frequency would pretty much be the same, but then on the river I wouldn't know what to do when he bets because he could be bluffing, or he could not be bluffing, or he could be valuing thin or whatever, then the turn becomes a fold, I think.
Yes, I agree with that. Basically, if the player is not polarized on the turn when he bets, then you have to fold because your hand, in terms of absolute value, is pretty weak.
Yep.
So then let me ask you this. Maybe we'll find out. But if the river is a brick and he checks, is your intention to bet?
No, I'm just looking to check down and hope my ace is good just because...
okay, good. Yeah,
like
I agree with that.
He's likely to be polarized, so my ace is likely to be good if he checks.
That's what I thought. That's just making sure. Okay.
Right. So we'll see. Yahoo! Value bet with the sevens. Was good. And I did get 4-bet on table 3 by Ibashi there.
Yeah,
so
I did see that.
It's good to take note of that for future use, just to see if he's going to 4-bet again or whatever. Like, that's something I always put in the back of my mind, like, okay, he has 4-bet me one time, so the game is getting, like, more and more aggressive right now. So
yep.
That's something you always want to keep track of.
Those are the kinds of hands, 9-7 suited on the button in a deep game, that I wouldn't 3-bet if I feel like I'm at any significant risk of getting 4-bet, because I think the hand has a lot of flop value.
I totally agree there. I totally agree. I probably didn't think that he was going to 4-bet much there, so that's why I did it. And I'm not going to 3-bet that cutoff against button. Like, I'm not ever going to 3-bet that 100 big blinds deep. Because it's just way too good to call in position, unless I don't know, the guy like calls every time out of position my 3-bets and then check folds every flop.
Right, of course.
And that's more value to be 3-betting it. But yeah, like you said, if I'm in danger of getting like pushed out of my hand with a lot of bluffs or whatever, then I agree that it no longer is good to 3-bet it.
Yep.
I flop an open on table 2. That's pretty interesting. I make it really, really small there.
I actually want to talk about that hand. I'm not sure if I like the small bet, but
yep.
But I want, because I actually also the first guy, the blind, has only $71. I actually want to price myself in. You know what I mean? Because you have to fold if he shoves on you, I think.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I want to do. Basically, I know if I bet like too big, I'm kind of priced in, but not that much, because you could have like flush draws, and my hand does really, really bad against the flush draw. And I don't know, I think my hand does really bad against everything that he shoves. So if I bet close to the pot, I'm kind of priced in, but I don't know. I just take the easy route of being absolutely sure that I'm not priced in, so I just bet super small and hope that they first fold their air type of hands, and if they shove anything that beats me, then I can just fold. And another added value of that is that with these two guys not being regulars, being fishes or whatever, I think they're going to call the flop like a lot with like any pair of 8 or 6, and when they just call the flop, I think I get stuck barreling turn and river a lot, because they won't even make the distinction that I bet super small on the flop, and that I probably wouldn't do that with a king. They will just know that they're facing like 3-bets after the first bet, they're in their mind they're like, okay, I faced one bet, and then I bet the turn. It's two bets, and then a river, and they just don't even look at the sizing. So I'm trying to manipulate them into calling with weaker hands on the flop, so I can multi-barrel the later streets. And even against the short stack there, and I don't have a note that he's like a regular short stack, so I assume he's a fish short stacker. So even against that guy, I'm likely to be like 3-barrel bluffing here by like betting 8 and then 12 on the turn and then shoving for his stack on the river, and then he folds pretty much all of his range on the river because he would probably raise a pair of kings on the flop just to protect himself against the draws. So that's my way of seeing it. I don't know if you agree.
Okay, yeah, no, I don't entirely disagree. I'm wondering what your equity is. I guess I don't know off the top of my head if you're against a hand like the nut flush draw with no pair. Is it that bad that, I mean, I guess my tendency when I see a flop like this and see a stack like he has is to want to price myself in. But now that I think about it, with the pot only having 24, you can only bet about like 20 if you did make a big bet, so it's still pretty ugly. So yeah, I guess you convinced me. I do agree with you. I do want to make another point though, sort of connecting with what we were talking earlier when you had the ace-10 of spades and the pocket sevens, and we were talking about negative equity bets. This is a classic example of a very positive equity bet.
Yeah.
Now, Martin here has the open-ended straight draw, obviously, which had a lot of value in itself. But as the pre-flop raiser, he's not really likely to get raised here off his hand, because you're not going to be if you're not going to be against a hand like ace king or something like that. I would imagine that a lot of top pair of kings, certainly from the player on the button, we don't know about the short stack, but player on the button would probably just call, if he with a hand like king jack or something like that. Now, what happens is there's three parts of the hand that work in Martin's favor. First is the obvious one. He's got the open-ended straight draw, a draw to the stone cold nuts that's going to be very well disguised, and if somebody's got something good, they're going to pay him off. The second is that the board has a specific dynamic that usually works pretty well to fire multiple barrels, and that is one card that is not an ace that's a high card, and then two that are not so much in the playing range. That usually works really well because the one card is not, there's only one card that's likely to have hit players, of their good calling range. You know what I mean? Like the ace queen and queen jack and king jack and stuff. There's only the king, and your continuation bet. If you had bet on an ace, people are usually going to fold, or sometimes going to fold, especially in the three-handed pot, hands that are less than an ace. But if they had a hand like pocket nines or an 8 here, they're going to fold if the flop was ace 8-6. But if it was king 8-6, they'll be more inclined to call because they just think you're continuation betting, and they'll put a lot more misses in your hand. Ace queen, ace jack, and so on.
Yep.
So therefore, the result of that is if you get just called on a board like this, you can barrel with a lot more fold equity, because what happens is a lot of times they will have a hand that they will call once with, but that can't beat a king. And when you fire a second time, you're representing at least a king, and now they can no longer take the heat. So when you have a flop like this, what happens is that basically the range of hands that your opponents can call once but cannot call twice is pretty big. I don't know if you agree.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's really, really cool that you put it into words. It's really nice. I totally agree with the whole principle, because I probably used it like for a long while without even thinking about it. But you putting it into words is really, really great, because that's all true. That's way better a board to multi-barrel on than an ace high board. That's super perfect, basically, just because of everything you said. So I don't really have anything else to add about that.
Cool, great. And then I had said there's three things. The third and last thing is the fact that you've got the backdoor flush draw. So what happens is that a spade is a really good card for you to obviously barrel on again. So it adds a lot of equity to you. Remember, you don't have to make the flush. You just have to make the flush draw. Which we've talked about that principle before in our last series. So putting all those three things together, this is a hand that has very, very positive equity to bet. which is exactly, it's a real good foil, a good contrast to the other two hands we were talking about earlier that had negative equity.
Yep. All that.
All right, so let's see what happens.
Let's see what happens. And then he shoves and it's useless.
Oh, look at that. He makes a little small raise.
Yeah,
You
that's
can
right.
call.
I don't know if I call. I don't know if I should call here. That's all. I shoved actually. Yeah. I think I shoved because I made it so small that he's likely to be bluffing with another small raise.
Oh, okay, yeah, okay.
So I think it's good. And that's a play that I'm going to be using a lot against players who I know that they're on that thinking level of like, oh, that's a small bit. I'm going to raise bluff. Oh, shit, he shoves. That's pretty much it. And that's pretty much what he's going to think a lot there. And it did work, either because he disconnected or whatever, but it
That's
worked.
funny.
So I'm going for another super.
I see that thin value. I mean,
one.
that one's actually more palatable for me because I think I can't imagine that. I think as opposed to the other one, although you did kind of talk me into it when I realized how small you had bet on the first one, but in this one, let me just recreate the hand for those of you that missed it. The flop was King 10 and some brick, and it went check. Martin had ace 10. The turn was a queen, and it went check again. The river was a 7. So I think that the only hand that he can have that can beat you in that spot is a queen, and I think that he can. And you beat all 10s now, so I think that you are more likely to get called light. So I think I like that one a lot better than I like the first one.
Yeah, but the first one worked.
Yeah. No, well then I love the first one.
Yeah, I do agree that it's more standard. It's a bit better.
Yeah. So no, I definitely like that one. I don't think it was that thin, even though your hand is pretty weak. He can't have anything there, and there is the small likelihood that he might just call you with Jack 10 or something like that. You know.
And I just want to come back just a second on my shove, like over his raise. That was pretty, let's say, non-standard. Let's see if I can find it without screwing everything. Okay, I got it. Yeah, when he... Ah, shit. Sorry about that. When he raised a small, my C-bet, and then I shove over. Yeah, I got it.
Yeah.
I'm doing this. I kind of talked to you my thought process earlier, but basically that's a play that is really, really, really powerful against a certain type of bad players, a certain type of fishes. That's a play that I'm going to be doing a lot, and like at 100 big blinds deep, in, let's say I re-raise, flop comes, I re-raise ace king out of position, 100 big blinds deep, flop comes, 3 low cards, like 2, 2, and 3, and then what I do is that I bet super small, and then against some type of bad players, and that's a lot of bad players actually that are going to have that exact thought process of, oh, that's pretty small. I'm either going to raise as a bluff, because that's a small bet, so he must be weak, or I am going to raise my pocket 9s, because that's a small bet, and then see what happens. That's pretty much their thought process. And then when you shove, either they have their bluff or the pocket 9s. It's like, oh shit, he shoved now, and they kind of forget that you bet so small at first.
Well, actually, the small bet looks more scary.
You must have a good hand. Sorry, yeah.
No, yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. In a way, when that happens against those players that think that way, then when they face the shove, that initial small bet, they actually can make it. It seems more scary to them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It seems like you were actually trying to just keep them in, or yeah.
And they're like, okay, and they basically raise fold a huge percentage of their range, and it's like easy free monies, and at worst if you get called then you have to over, or you could do that with like a flush draw or a straight draw or whatever. I know I used to do that play like absurdly often, like maybe a year and a half or 2 years ago, where even the regulars were like raising their mid pocket pairs in that type of spot for information, and then shoving to a fold or whatever. And they were raising every time I bet small because, that looked weak. I was making that play like every single re-raise spot, and it was working every single time, basically. But now people are not as dumb as they used to be. But it still works against bad players, obviously. So that's something you might want to add to your arsenal if you want to be able to exploit the fishes.
A word of caution, though. You got to be careful. There are going to be some players out there that, like on a flop of 2-2-3, they will raise with their pocket nines, as Martin said, and then right, exactly. Then they get shoved on and they're upset and they're like shit, but then they call anyway. So
you do want to be cautious with these ones. But I think that that spot with the 5-7 was a classic example of someone who was like raising with a pair of eights here. Just, okay, that's a small bit. I'm going to protect my hand here because there are a lot of draws and then see what happens. And then I shove and he's like, and then he times out and folds.
Yeah.
So that's a funny play and a very, very powerful one, let's say.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I think we've been going for about 50 minutes. You wanna call this part one?
Yeah.
Okay.
That would be a good idea.
Okay. So, cool. Well, I hope you guys like this. As has been typical with me and Martin, we've been getting into a lot of discussion and maybe not as many hands. But I think based on the comments that we've been getting from the first series, that seems to be okay with you guys. And like Martin says, I think that'll set us up for about a 58-part series, of which this is part one. So do give us your feedback. Let us know if we'll be recording this over the next, I don't know, I would like to think a few weeks, but we'll see if we can.
Years.
Do let us know. Hope you guys are enjoying it. Anything you want to add, Martin?
Yep, that's pretty much it.
Okay, yes. Cool. Thanks, guys.
See ya.
See ya.